"You smell like garbage," the millionaire woman said to the garbage man, humiliating him. But years later she was left speechless when she saw who he had become. On the cobblestone streets of an old neighborhood in the city, Mark Rodriguez, a 28-year-old man, worked diligently as a garbage collector. His bright orange uniform contrasted with the gray of the surrounding buildings as he picked up trash bags with a smile on his face. Despite his humble profession, Mark took pride in keeping the city clean and earning an honest living. One spring morning, while on his usual route, Mark noticed a beautiful young woman struggling with several shopping bags. Without hesitation, he approached to help her. "Allow me, miss," Mark said kindly, extending his hands to take some of the bags. The young woman, surprised by the gesture, looked up, and their eyes met. It was a magical moment, as if time stood still for an instant. "Thank you," she replied with a shy smile. "I'm Valerie Montgomery, Mark Rodriguez at your service." He introduced himself, unable to take his eyes off her honey-colored eyes. As they walked together towards Valerie's apartment building, they chatted animatedly. She was impressed by Mark's kindness and charisma, completely forgetting about his garbage collector uniform. Upon reaching the building's entrance, Valerie hesitated for a moment before saying, "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" Mark, surprised and excited, accepted without thinking twice. They exchanged phone numbers and said goodbye with the promise of seeing each other again soon. What neither of them knew at that moment was that this chance encounter would change their lives forever, triggering a series of events that would test their love, strength, and values. As Mark continued his route, whistling cheerfully, he couldn't imagine the challenges that awaited him. Fate had set in motion a plan that would lead him down a path full of obstacles, but also unimaginable opportunities. In her luxurious penthouse on the other side of the city, Mrs. Evelyn Montgomery, Valerie's mother, savored her morning tea without knowing that her daughter had just met the man who would alter the course of their lives. The matriarch of the Montgomery family, known for her relentless ambition and contempt for the working class, was about to face her worst nightmare. The days following the encounter between Mark and Valerie were filled with text messages, phone calls, and shared laughter. Finally, the day of their first official date arrived. Mark, nervous but excited, waited for Valerie at a small cafe in the city center. When Valerie entered, the place seemed to light up. She wore a simple floral dress that highlighted her natural beauty. Mark stood up to greet her, feeling his heart beating fast. "You look beautiful," said Mark, softly kissing her cheek. Valerie blushed. "Thank you. You look very handsome too." The conversation flowed naturally. They talked about their dreams, their fears, their families. Mark told her about his work as a garbage collector and how, despite the difficulties, he felt proud to contribute to keeping the city clean. Valerie, for her part, shared her passion for art and her desire to open a gallery someday. "My mother has always wanted me to dedicate myself to the family business," Valerie confessed with a hint of sadness. "But my true passion is art." Mark took her hand across the table. "You should follow your heart. I'm sure you'd be an excellent gallery owner." Those words touched Valerie deeply. For the first time in a long time, she felt understood and supported. The weeks passed and their relationship strengthened. They went for walks in the park, visited museums, and shared long conversations under the stars. Love blossomed between them, pure and sincere. However, Valerie had not yet mentioned Mark at home. She knew that her mother, Mrs. Montgomery, would never approve of a relationship with someone from the working class. But the love she felt for Mark was stronger than any social prejudice. One night, while dining at a small restaurant, Valerie made a decision. "Mark," she said with determination, "I want to introduce you to my family." Mark, surprised but happy, nodded. "I'd love to meet them." What neither of them imagined was the storm that was about to break loose. Mrs. Evelyn Montgomery, with her contempt for the working classes and her obsession with social status, would become the biggest obstacle to their love. Meanwhile, in the Montgomery mansion, Mrs. Montgomery was arguing with her husband, Mr. Albert Montgomery, about their daughter's future. "Valerie needs to settle down and take the reins of the company," Mrs. Montgomery said firmly. She can't keep wasting time with those art nonsenses. Mr. Montgomery, a good-natured man and more understanding than his wife, tried to mediate. "Dear, our daughter is young. Let's let her find her own path." "Nonsense!" exclaimed Mrs. Montgomery. "I'll make sure Valerie understands her place and her duty to this family." Little did Mrs. Montgomery know that her plans were about to be challenged by the true love that had been born between her daughter and a humble garbage collector. The battle between the heart and prejudices was about to begin. The day of the official presentation arrived sooner than expected. Mark, dressed in his best suit, a bit worn but impeccably ironed, waited nervously in front of the imposing Montgomery mansion. Valerie, by his side, squeezed his hand to encourage him. "Everything will be fine," she whispered, though deep down she feared her mother's reaction. As they entered the luxurious living room, they were greeted by Mr. Montgomery, who welcomed them with a kind smile. However, the atmosphere changed drastically when Mrs. Montgomery made her entrance, wearing a designer dress and jewelry that shone ostentatiously. "So this is the young man you've talked so much about, Valerie," said Mrs. Montgomery, scrutinizing Mark from head to toe with a contemptuous look. Mark, gathering all his courage, extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Montgomery. I'm Mark Rodriguez." Mrs. Montgomery barely touched his hand, as if she feared contamination. "And what do you do for a living, young man?" Before Mark could answer, Valerie intervened. "Mom, Mark has a very important job for the community. I'm a garbage collector, ma'am," Mark interrupted proudly. "I'm in charge of keeping our city clean." The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Montgomery turned pale, while Mr. Montgomery seemed genuinely interested. "A garbage collector," Mrs. Montgomery finally exclaimed, with a mixture of horror and disgust in her voice. "Valerie, how can you associate with someone like that? I bet he stinks of garbage." "Mom!" Valerie shouted, horrified by the cruelty of her words. Mark, hurt but determined to maintain his composure, responded with dignity. "Ma'am, my job may not be glamorous, but it's honest and necessary. I'm proud of what I do." Mr. Montgomery, trying to smooth over the situation, intervened. "Come on, Evelyn, don't be rude. The young man is right, his job is very important." But Mrs. Montgomery was beside herself. "I will not allow my daughter to associate with a nobody, a garbage picker. What will our friends say?" The dinner that followed was a disaster. Mrs. Montgomery didn't stop making derogatory comments about Mark's work, his clothes, and even insinuated that he was only interested in the family's money. Valerie tried to defend him, but every time she did, her mother accused her of being ungrateful and wanting to ruin the Montgomery name. At the end of the night, as Mark was saying goodbye, Mrs. Montgomery delivered one last blow. "I hope you understand, boy, that someone like you will never be welcome in this house. You stink of garbage, and that's something no perfume can hide." Valerie, with tears in her eyes, accompanied Mark to the door. "I'm so sorry, my love. I swear this doesn't change anything between us." Mark, although deeply hurt, smiled at her tenderly. "Don't worry, my life. We'll get through this together." As Mark walked away into the night, Valerie confronted her mother in a heated argument. "I can't believe how cruel you've been, Mom. Mark is a wonderful man, and I love him. He's a nobody." Mrs. Montgomery shouted, "I forbid you to see him again. You will not ruin this family's name over a whim." Mr. Montgomery tried to mediate, but his voice was lost in the battle between mother and daughter. The seed of discord had been planted, and its roots threatened to destroy not only the love between Mark and Valerie, but also the unity of the Montgomery family. That night, as Mark returned to his modest apartment, he vowed that he would do everything possible to prove his worth, not only to Mrs. Montgomery, but to the whole world. He didn't know how, but he would find a way to be worthy of Valerie's love, no matter what obstacles he had to face. The days that followed the disastrous dinner were a whirlwind of emotions for Mark and Valerie. Despite Mrs. Montgomery's opposition, the couple refused to separate. They met in secret, sharing stolen moments in distant parks and discreet cafes. Mark, determined to prove his worth, began looking for a second job. During the day, he continued with his work as a garbage collector, and at night he washed dishes in a downtown restaurant. Fatigue accumulated in his body, but the love he felt for Valerie drove him to keep going. Valerie, for her part, faced a daily battle in her home. Mrs. Montgomery never missed an opportunity to criticize Mark and remind her daughter of what she considered a huge mistake. "Haven't you come to your senses yet?" Mrs. Montgomery spat at her during breakfast. "That boy will only bring shame to our family." But Valerie remained firm. "I don't care what you say, Mum. I love Mark, and I won't give up on him." Mr. Montgomery, although sympathizing with his daughter, felt caught between two fires. "Evelyn, dear, don't you think you're being too hard? Valerie is an adult woman." "Silence, Albert," Mrs. Montgomery replied. "You don't understand anything about social position." The tension in the Montgomery mansion grew day by day. Valerie felt increasingly alienated from her mother, and the relationship between her parents also began to suffer. Meanwhile, Mark struggled to maintain his two jobs and save money. He dreamed of being able to offer Valerie a dignified life, away from her mother's criticism and contempt. One night, after a long day of work, Mark surprised Valerie with an improvised dinner on the roof of his building. He had decorated the place with Christmas lights and prepared a simple but delicious dinner. "Mark, this is beautiful," said Valerie, moved. "I wanted to show you that. Although I can't offer you luxuries, I can give you all my love," Mark replied. Taking her hands that night under the stars, they renewed their promise of love and decided that nothing and no one would separate them. However, Mrs. Montgomery was not willing to give up. She began to plan how to separate the couple once and for all. She contacted old friendships, pulled strings, and soon had a plan that she was sure would end that relationship that embarrassed her so much one afternoon. While Mark was working on his usual route as a garbage collector, he was approached by a man in a suit. "Mr. Rodriguez," the man said with an authoritative voice, "I'm the city's health inspector. We've received complaints about your performance and conduct during work." Mark, surprised and confused, responded, "There must be a mistake, sir. I've always strived to do my job in the best possible way." "We'll see about that," replied the inspector, taking out a notebook. "From now on, I'll be personally supervising your work. Any mistake, no matter how small, will be grounds for sanction." Mark didn't know it, but this inspector was actually an actor hired by Mrs. Montgomery to harass and pressure him at work. It was just the beginning of her plan to separate him from Valerie. The following days were hell for Mark. The fake inspector followed him everywhere, criticizing every aspect of his work and constantly threatening him with the loss of his job. The stress began to take its toll on him, affecting his performance in both his day and night. Valerie noticed the change in Mark. "What's wrong, love? You seem worried," she asked him one afternoon while they were walking in the park. Mark, not wanting to worry her, tried to downplay it. "It's nothing. I'm just a little tired from the extra work." But Valerie wasn't easy to fool. "Mark, we're a team. If something's bothering you, I want to know so I can support you." Finally, Mark told her about the inspector and the difficulties he was facing at work. Valerie, suspecting that her mother might be behind all this, decided to investigate on her own. Meanwhile, Mrs. Montgomery intensified her campaign against Mark. She began spreading rumors in her social circle about her daughter's garbage collector boyfriend, describing Mark as an opportunist who was only after the Montgomery family's money. "It's a shame," she would say to her friends during tea. "My daughter, who could have any man from a good family, chose a filthy garbage collector. He stinks of garbage every time he gets close." The rumors soon reached Valerie's ears, who confronted her mother in a heated argument. "How can you be so cruel, Mom? Don't you realize you're hurting the person I love?" Valerie shouted with tears of rage in her eyes. Mrs. Montgomery, unperturbed, replied, "I'm doing it for your own good, daughter. Someday you'll thank me." The tension in the Montgomery family reached its peak. Mr. Montgomery, unable to bear the situation any longer, decided to intervene. "Evelyn, this has to stop," he said with unusual firmness. "You're destroying our family with your obsession." But Mrs. Montgomery was determined to have her way no matter the cost. "I won't stop until Valerie comes to her senses and leaves that filthy garbage collector." What no one knew was that Mrs. Montgomery's plan was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would change the course of everyone's lives in ways no one could. Imagine Mrs. Montgomery's plan to separate Mark and Valerie was reaching its climax. One afternoon, while Valerie was at home, her mother organized an emergency family meeting. "Valerie, dear," Mrs. Montgomery began with false sweetness, "we need to talk about your future." Valerie, suspecting her mother's intentions, became defensive. "If it's about Mark, I've already told you I'm not going to leave him." Mrs. Montgomery smiled maliciously. "Oh, it's not just about that. You see, the family business is facing a crisis, and we need you to take charge of the foreign branch. It's a unique opportunity for you." "What? But I don't want to leave. My life is here with Mark," Valerie protested. Mr. Montgomery, who had remained silent until that moment, intervened. "Daughter, I know it's difficult, but the family needs you. It will only be for a few months." Valerie looked at her father, surprised by his support for this plan. "Dad, you agree with this too?" What Valerie didn't know was that Mrs. Montgomery had manipulated her husband, convincing him that the separation was necessary for everyone's good. Meanwhile, Mark faced his own challenges. The harassment from the fake inspector had intensified, and his boss had called him for an urgent meeting. "Rodriguez," his supervisor said with regret, "I'm sorry to inform you that due to constant complaints and the inspector's report, we'll have to terminate your services." Mark felt like the world was crashing down on him. "But sir, there must be a mistake. I've always fulfilled my job." "I'm sorry, Mark. The decision has been made." That night, Mark and Valerie met at their secret place. Both with devastating news to share. "They fired me," Mark said, his voice breaking. "And they're forcing me to go abroad," Valerie replied, in tears. They hugged tightly, feeling their world crumbling. "It must be my mother's doing," Valerie said. "She'll never accept us." Mark, despite his pain, tried to be strong for both of them. "I'll find another job, I'll fight for us, I won't let them separate us." But Valerie, seeing the exhaustion and desperation in Mark's eyes, made a heartbreaking decision. "Mark, my love, maybe we should take some time apart." "What?" "No, Valerie, we can overcome this together," Mark pleaded. "I love you more than anything in this world," Valerie said between sobs. "But I can't bear to see how they're destroying you because of me. I need time to confront my family and fix things." With a broken heart, Mark accepted Valerie's decision. They said goodbye with a last kiss, promising that their love would overcome this test. The following days were a whirlwind. Valerie left for abroad, leaving behind a devastated Mark. Mrs. Montgomery celebrated her victory, sure that she had managed to separate the couple definitively. Mark, without a job and without the love of his life, fell into a deep depression. The accumulated stress and emotional pain began to affect his health. One morning, while looking for work, Mark collapsed on the street and was rushed to the hospital. The diagnosis was serious. Overwork and emotional stress had caused a collapse in his immune system. Mark would need weeks of recovery and intensive care. As he lay in the hospital bed, Mark reflected on his life and his love for Valerie. Despite everything, he couldn't stop loving her. He promised himself that he would recover and fight to build a worthy future, with or without Valerie by his side. What Mark didn't know was that his story was far from over. Fate had surprises in store that would change the course of his life in unimaginable ways. The struggle for love and dignity was just beginning, and the path to redemption would be full of unexpected turns. Months passed, and Mark's life took an unexpected turn. After his recovery in the hospital, a nurse named Lisa moved by. His story offered to help. Lisa's grandmother, Mrs. Carroll, owned a small family restaurant and needed help. "Mark," Lisa said one day, "I know you're going through a difficult time, but my grandmother needs an extra pair of hands in her restaurant. Would you be interested?" Mark, grateful for the opportunity, accepted without hesitation. "Thank you, Lisa. I'll do my best." Carroll's Corner, as the restaurant was called, was a cozy place in a traditional neighborhood of the city. Mrs. Carroll, a woman in her 70s with enviable energy, welcomed Mark with open arms. "So you're the young man my granddaughter told me about," said Mrs. Carroll, examining him from head to toe. "Well, here we value hard work and honesty. Are you ready to learn?" Mark nodded with determination. "I'm willing to learn everything I can, Mrs. Carroll." The days at the restaurant were exhausting but rewarding. Mark learned to cook, to serve customers, and to handle the basic finances of the business. Little by little, he earned the respect and affection of Mrs. Carroll and the regular customers. One night after closing the restaurant, Mrs. Carroll sat down with Mark to talk. "Son," she said affectionately, "you've proven to be an exceptional worker. You remind me of my late husband when he was young. I have a proposal for you." Mark listened attentively. As Mrs. Carroll explained her plan, she wanted to expand the business, open a second location, and wanted Mark to be her partner. But Mrs. Carroll, Mark, protested, "I don't have money to invest." "You don't need money, boy," she replied with a smile. "You'll invest your work and dedication, I'll provide the capital, and you'll be in charge of growing the business." With tears in his eyes, Mark accepted the offer. For the first time in a long time, he felt his life was taking a positive turn. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Valerie faced her own challenges. The work at the foreign branch of the family company was demanding and unsatisfying. Every day she thought about Mark and the life she had left behind one afternoon. While reviewing some documents, Valerie found something that left her cold. They were proofs of illegal activities in the company, money laundering, operations that directly involved her mother, Mrs. Montgomery. Horrified by the discovery, Valerie debated between her family loyalty and her sense of justice. She decided to confront her father, Mr. Montgomery, in a phone call. "Dad," she said with a trembling voice, "I've discovered something terrible about the company. Did you know about this?" Mr. Montgomery was silent for a moment before responding with regret. "Daughter, there are things that are better not to talk about over the phone. Come home, we have a lot to discuss." Valerie, confused and distressed, decided to return immediately. Her world was about to change drastically, once again. Back in the city, Mark worked tirelessly on opening the new restaurant. Lisa, Mrs. Carroll's granddaughter, had become a good friend and constant support. Although the memory of Valerie still hurt, Mark was beginning to feel he could be happy again. The day of the inauguration of the new Carroll's Corner arrived. The place was full of people, and the aroma of delicious food filled the air. Mark, dressed in an impeccable chef's uniform, felt proud of what he had accomplished. In the midst of the celebration, the door opened and a familiar figure entered. Mark was paralyzed to see Valerie, more beautiful than ever, standing at the entrance of the restaurant. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to stop for an instant. They both knew that this unexpected encounter would mark the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. One full of revelations, difficult decisions, and perhaps a second chance for their love. The bustle of the restaurant seemed to fade away when Mark and Valerie found themselves face to face. For a moment, neither of them knew what to say. "Mark," Valerie whispered, breaking the silence. I didn't expect to find you here." Mark, still surprised, responded, "Valerie, you're back. This is my restaurant." Well, partly before they could continue their conversation, Lisa approached, curious about the scene. "Mark, is everything okay?" she asked, looking at Valerie with intrigue. "Yes, Lisa. She's an old friend," Mark replied, not knowing how to explain the situation. Valerie felt a pang of jealousy seeing the familiarity between Mark and Lisa, but she struggled to maintain her composure. "Congratulations on your restaurant, Mark. It looks amazing," Valerie said, trying to sound casual. "Thank you," Mark replied. "It's been a long road, but—" Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Carroll, who approached with a big smile. "Mark, son, what a success. I'm so proud of you," exclaimed the old woman, hugging him tightly. Then, noticing Valerie, she asked, "And who is this beautiful young lady?" Mark, uncomfortable, made the introductions. Valerie, impressed by the affection Mrs. Carroll showed towards Mark, felt a mixture of joy for his success and sadness for the time lost. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Carroll," Valerie said with a forced smile. "Congratulations on the success of the restaurant." Mrs. Carroll, with the wisdom that comes with years, noticed the tension between the two young people. "Mark, why don't you take your friend to the terrace? You can talk more quietly there, Lisa, and I will take care of everything here." Grateful for the opportunity, Mark guided Valerie to the restaurant's terrace. The cool night air enveloped them as they sat at a secluded table. You look good, Mark, Valerie began, breaking the awkward silence. It seems you've done very well. Mark nodded. It's been a difficult road, but Mrs. Carroll and Lisa gave me a chance when I needed it most. He paused before asking, And you? How has it been abroad? Valerie lowered her gaze, her expression darkening. Things haven't been as I expected, Mark. I've discovered terrible things about my family, about the company. Intrigued and concerned, Mark leaned towards her. What do you mean? With tears in her eyes, Valerie told him about the discovery of the company's illegal activities, her mother's involvement, and her father's apparent complicity. I don't know what to do, Mark, Valerie confessed, her voice breaking. Everything I believed in is crumbling. Mark, moved by her pain, instinctively took her hand. Valerie, I'm so sorry. I know it must be difficult, but you're strong. You'll find a way to do the right thing. Their eyes met, and for a moment, it was as if time hadn't passed. The spark between them was still there, waiting to be rekindled. Mark, Valerie began, but was interrupted by the sound of her phone. It was a message from her father, urgent. Daughter, we need to talk. It's about your mother and the company. Come home immediately. Valerie looked at Mark with anguish. I have to go. My father, he needs to talk to me. Mark nodded, understanding. Go, but Valerie, if you need anything at all, I'll be here. With her heart divided between the past and the present, Valerie stood up. Thank you, Mark. And really, I'm happy for you. You deserve it. As Valerie walked away, Mark stayed on the terrace, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The reunion had stirred up feelings he thought were buried, but it had also shown him how much they had both changed. Back in the main hall, Lisa approached Mark. Are you okay? She asked with genuine concern. Mark gave her a weak smile. Yes, it's just a long story. Lisa, sensing there was more to what Mark was saying, decided not to push. Well, when you want to talk, I'll be here. Meanwhile, Valerie arrived at the Montgomery mansion. The atmosphere was tense, and she could feel that something important was about to happen. Mr. Montgomery received her in his office, his face showing years of worry and guilt. Daughter, sit down. There's a lot I need to tell you. What Valerie was about to hear would change not only her life, but that of everyone around her. The revelations of that night would set in motion a series of events that would shake the foundations of the Montgomery family and force Valerie to make decisions she never thought possible. Valerie sat in front of her father, her heart pounding. Mr. Montgomery, visibly exhausted, began to speak with a broken voice. My dear daughter, what I'm about to tell you I should have said a long time ago, he began. Your mother, she wasn't always like this. Mr. Montgomery recounted how, years ago, the family business faced a devastating financial crisis. It was then that Mrs. Montgomery, desperate to maintain the family status and wealth, began to engage in illicit activities. At first, I convinced myself it was temporary, that it was for the good of the family, Mr. Montgomery confessed, tears in his eyes, but things got out of control. Your mother became obsessed with power and money. Valerie listened, horrified. But Dad, why didn't you stop her? Why didn't you say anything? I was afraid, Valerie. Afraid of losing everything, of losing you, and over time I became complicit in her. Silence. The revelation hit Valerie like a cold wave. Suddenly, she understood the origin of her mother's contempt for Mark, her obsession with appearances, her cruelty disguised as maternal love. And now what, Dad? Valerie asked, feeling the world crumbling around her. Mr. Montgomery pulled a folder from his desk. Here's all the evidence of the illegal activities. Valerie, I'm going to turn myself into the authorities and confess everything. What? No, Valerie exclaimed, jumping to her feet. It's the right thing to do, daughter. I've lived with this guilt for too long. It's time to face the consequences. At that moment, the office door burst open. Mrs. Montgomery entered, her face contorted with anger. What do you think you're doing, Albert? She shouted, looking at the folder on the desk. It's over, Evelyn, Mr. Montgomery replied, with a calmness that surprised Valerie. No more lies, no more crimes. What followed was a heated argument. Mrs. Montgomery, beside herself, alternated between threats and pleas. Valerie, stunned, watched her parents as if they were strangers. If you do this, we'll lose everything. Mrs. Montgomery shrieked. "Is that what you want? To see us on the street like that filthy garbage man?" The mention of Mark brought Valerie back to reality. Suddenly she saw clearly the toxicity that had poisoned her family for years. "Enough, Mum," Valerie said, with a firmness that surprised everyone, even herself. "Dad is right. This has to end." Mrs. Montgomery looked at her daughter with a mixture of surprise and contempt. "You don't understand anything, you foolish girl. Everything I've done has been for you, for this family." "No, Mom," Valerie replied, feeling years of resentment and pain surface. "You've done it for yourself, for your ego, for your obsession with appearances. And in the process, you almost destroyed my life. And Dad's—" The tension in the room was palpable. Mr. Montgomery, seeing that the situation was getting out of control, made a decision. "Evelyn, Valerie, sit down," he said with authority. "We're going to talk about this as a family, for the last time." As the Montgomery family faced their moment of truth, across town Mark was closing. The restaurant, after a successful night, Lisa approached him, concerned about his pensive expression. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" she asked gently. Mark sighed. "It's a long story, Lisa, but I think it's time I told you." That night, as two crucial conversations took place, fate was preparing new twists for all involved. The decisions made in the next few hours would change the course of their lives forever, and no one would emerge unscathed from the revelations that were about to come. The night progressed, and in two different parts of the city, conversations were unfolding that would change the course of several lives. In the Montgomery mansion, the family faced its darkest hour. Mrs. Montgomery, cornered by accusations and evidence, finally broke down. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her mask of arrogance crumbling. "I don't know at what point I lost my way. The fear of losing everything consumed me." Valerie, moved but firm, took her mother's hand. "Mum, I understand your fear, but what you've done, it has caused so much damage." Mr. Montgomery, with the folder of evidence in hand, spoke with determination. "First thing tomorrow morning, I'm going to the prosecutor's office. I'll confess everything and hand over the evidence." "And what will happen to us?" Mrs. Montgomery asked, fear evident in her voice. "We'll face the consequences together," Valerie replied, "as a family." The decision was made. The Montgomery family prepared to face an uncertain future, but for the first time in years they would do so with honesty. Meanwhile, in Mark's small apartment, he and Lisa were talking about the night's events. "So she was the love of your life," Lisa said, after hearing the full story. Mark nodded. "She was. Or maybe she still is, I don't know, Lisa. Seeing her again, it stirred up a lot of things." Lisa looked at him with a mixture of understanding and something else, a feeling that had been growing silently. "Mark, there's something I need to tell you." But before Lisa could continue, Mark's phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" Mark answered, intrigued. "Mark, it's me, Valerie," said the voice on the other end of the line. "I need to see you, it's urgent." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "Is everything okay?" "Not really," Valerie replied. "Can we meet at the park near your restaurant?" "In an hour." Mark agreed, concern evident on his face. As he hung up, he turned to Lisa. "It was Valerie. She needs to see me," he explained. "I'm sorry, Lisa. Can we continue this conversation tomorrow?" Lisa, hiding her disappointment, nodded. "Sure, go. It seems important." As Mark prepared to leave, Lisa watched him, aware that the moment she had been waiting for to confess her feelings had vanished. An hour later, Mark arrived at the park. Valerie was already there, sitting on a bench, her face showing signs of having cried. "Valerie, what's going on?" Mark asked, sitting next to her. With a trembling voice, Valerie told him everything. Her mother's illegal activities, her father's complicity, the decision to turn themselves in to the authorities. "Everything is falling apart, Mark," Valerie said, tears returning to her eyes. "I don't know what to do." Mark, moved by her pain, instinctively hugged her. "Valerie, I know it's difficult, but you've made the right decision. You're strong, you'll get through this." They stayed like that for a moment, the warmth of their embrace comforting in the cold night. When they finally separated, their eyes met. "Mark, I never stopped loving you, Valerie confessed. I know I hurt you, that it's probably too late, but I needed to tell you. Mark felt his heart racing. The feelings he had tried to bury for months resurfaced strongly, but he also thought about Lisa, about Mrs. Carroll, about the new life he had built. Valerie, he began, but was interrupted by the sound of sirens in the distance. Suddenly, the park filled with patrol lights. Several officers approached them. Miss Valerie Montgomery, one of the officers asked. Valerie stood up, confused. Yes, that's me. You're under arrest for complicity in money laundering activities, the officer announced, proceeding to read her rights. Mark, stunned, tried to intervene but was pushed aside by another. Officer, Mark, Valerie shouted as they handcuffed her. Please call my father. Tell him I kept my promise. As Valerie was led to the patrol car, Mark stood in the park, his mind a whirlwind of emotions and questions. The night that had begun with an unexpected reunion ended with a dramatic twist that no one could have foreseen. What Mark didn't know was that this arrest was just the beginning of a series of events that would test his love, loyalty, and determination like never before. The path to truth and redemption was just beginning, and everyone involved would face challenges that would change their lives forever. The days following Valerie's arrest were a whirlwind of events for everyone involved. The news of the fall of the Montgomery Empire spread like wildfire through the city, occupying the front pages of newspapers and newscasts. Mark, still shocked by the events, was torn between his desire to help Valerie and confusion about his own feelings. Lisa, noticing his distress, decided to give him space, although her heart shrank every time she saw him lost in thought. In jail, Valerie faced the harsh reality of her new situation. The cold cells and hostile faces of the other inmates were a cruel reminder of how much her life had changed in such a short time. One morning, as Valerie waited in the visitation room, she saw the last person she expected to see enter, Mrs. Carroll. Mrs. Carroll, Valerie asked, surprised. What are you doing here? The old woman sat across from her, her eyes full of compassion. I came to see how you were doing. Child Mark told me everything. Valerie felt tears threatening. To spill, how is he? Worried about you, Mrs. Carroll replied honestly. But also confused, he's been through a lot, you know. Valerie nodded, remorse weighing on her. I know I never meant to hurt him. Mrs. Carroll took Valerie's hands in hers. Listen, child, life gives us difficult tests, but it's these tests that reveal who we really are. You've made a brave decision by facing the truth. Mrs. Carroll's words touched something deep in Valerie. For the first time since her arrest, she felt that perhaps there was hope. Meanwhile, in the prosecutor's office, Mr. Albert Montgomery was confessing all the details of the company's illegal activities. His testimony implicated several powerful politicians and businessmen, triggering a series of arrests that shook the foundations of high society. Mrs. Montgomery, for her part, faced her own demons confined to the now empty family mansion. She was consumed by guilt and regret. The words, "You stink of garbage," echoed in her mind, but now she understood that it was she who had stunk of corruption all this time. One afternoon, as Mark was closing the restaurant, he received an unexpected visit. It was Mr. Montgomery, visibly aged by the stress of recent days. "Mark," the man said, his voice laden with emotion, "I know I have no right to ask you anything, but I need your help." Intrigued and a little wary, Mark invited him to sit down. "How can I help you, Mr. Montgomery?" "It's about Valerie," Mr. Montgomery began. "She's not guilty of anything. She's sacrificing herself to protect her mother and me. I need you to help me prove her innocence." Mark felt his heart racing. "How can I do that?" Mr. Montgomery pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Here are documents that prove Valerie was unaware of the illegal activities, but I can't present them myself without compromising my testimony against the others involved." "And you want me to present them?" Mark asked, understanding the gravity of the situation. Mr. Montgomery nodded. "I know it's a lot to ask, after everything you've been through because of us, but you're the only person I can trust to do this." Mark took the envelope, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Helping Valerie would mean immersing himself again in a world he had managed to escape. but the idea of her suffering unjustly was unbearable to him. "I'll do it," Mark finally said. "But not for you or Mrs. Montgomery, I'll do it for Valerie." Mr. Montgomery, with tears in his eyes, shook Mark's hand. "Thank you, son. I wish we had valued you as you deserved from the beginning." As Mr. Montgomery left, Mark stood contemplating the envelope. He knew that what he was about to do could change the course of many lives, including his own. What Mark didn't know was that his actions would trigger a series of events that would not only affect Valerie's fate and that of her family, but would also lead him to face his own feelings and make decisions that would determine his future. The path to truth and justice was fraught with dangers and surprises, and Mark was about to embark on the riskiest adventure of his life. The question was, would he be prepared for the consequences of his actions? The following days were an emotional roller coaster for Mark. With the help of a lawyer friend of Mrs. Carroll's, he began working on Valerie's defense, using the documents provided by Mr. Montgomery. Lisa, noticing Mark's dedication to this new mission, felt her heart torn between the love she felt for him and the desire to see him happy, even if it meant losing him. One afternoon, while Mark was reviewing some papers in the restaurant, Lisa approached him. "Mark," she said softly, "we need to talk." He looked up, noticing the seriousness on her face. "Sure, Lisa. What's going on?" Lisa took a deep breath before speaking. "I know how much Valerie means to you, and I want you to know that I support you, whatever your decision." Mark looked at her, confused. "Lisa, let me finish," she interrupted. "I love you, Mark. I've been in love with you for a while now, but I understand that your heart belongs to someone else, and that's okay." Lisa's words hit Mark like a wave. He had never realized her feelings, and now he felt guilty for not having noticed. "Lisa, I don't know what to say. You're an incredible person, and I care about you a lot, but not in the same way," Lisa completed with a sad smile. "I understand, I just wanted you to know." Before Mark could respond, Lisa leaned in and gave him a soft kiss on the cheek before quickly leaving the restaurant. Mark sat there, stunned by the revelation and feeling more confused than ever about his feelings. Meanwhile, in jail, Valerie received a visit from her mother, Mrs. Montgomery. Stripped of her usual arrogance, seemed to have aged years in just a few weeks. "My daughter," said Mrs. Montgomery, her voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." Valerie, surprised by her mother's vulnerability, felt the resentment she had harbored for so long begin to dissolve. "Mom," she responded softly, "we both made mistakes, but we're here now, and that's what matters." Mrs. Montgomery took her daughter's hands across the table. "Valerie, I want you to know that I'm doing everything I can to get you out of here. I've hired the best lawyer and—" "No, Mom," Valerie interrupted. "I don't want you to use dirty money to help me. I'd rather face the consequences with dignity." The determination in Valerie's eyes made Mrs. Montgomery see her daughter in a new light. For the first time, she understood the true meaning of strength and integrity. "I'm proud of you, daughter," said Mrs. Montgomery, tears running down her cheeks. "More than you can imagine." As mother and daughter shared a moment of reconciliation, across town, Mark was making a decision that would change the course of events. Determined to get to the bottom of the truth, Mark began investigating on his own, beyond the documents provided by Mr. Montgomery. His inquiries led him to uncover a corruption network much wider than anyone had imagined. One night, while following a lead, Mark found himself in a dangerous situation. Hidden in an abandoned warehouse, he overheard a conversation between two shadowy figures who mentioned the Montgomery family and talked about silencing those who threatened to expose the truth. Mark's heart was racing as he realized he had stumbled upon something much bigger and more dangerous than he had anticipated. He knew that the information he had discovered could not only free Valerie, but also unmask the true culprits behind the entire operation. But he was also aware that possessing this information made him a target. Mark now faced a crucial decision. Should he go ahead and risk everything for the truth and for Valerie? Or should he step back and protect the new life he had built with so much effort? As Mark weighed his options, He didn't know that his actions were about to trigger a series of events that would test his courage, integrity, and love like never before. The fate of many now depended on the decision of an ex-garbage collector turned entrepreneur, whose heart was divided between the love of the past and the promises of the future. Mark's decision was clear. He couldn't turn back now that he knew the truth. With determination, he began to gather all the information he had discovered, resolved to present it to the authorities and clear Valerie's name. However, Mark was aware of the danger he was in. He decided to trust the two people who had supported him the most, Mrs. Carroll and Lisa. One night after closing the restaurant, Mark gathered them to tell them everything he had discovered. "This is bigger than we thought," Mark explained, showing them the documents and recordings he had collected. "There are politicians, judges, and businessmen involved in this corruption network." Mrs. Carroll, with the wisdom of her years, was the first to speak. "Son, this is very dangerous, but I understand why you feel you must do it." Lisa, for her part, although she felt her heart breaking seeing Mark's devotion to Valerie, couldn't help but admire his bravery. "Count on me for whatever you need, Mark," she said firmly. Meanwhile, in jail, Valerie received an unexpected visit. It was the lawyer hired by Mark, who explained that new evidence had come to light and that there was a real possibility she would be released soon. "Who's behind this?" Valerie asked, surprised by the turn of events. The lawyer smiled. "A very brave and determined man. I think you know him well." Valerie's heart skipped a beat as she realized that Mark was fighting for her. A mixture of gratitude and concern invaded her, fearing that he might put himself in danger to help her. As Mark prepared his next move, the dark forces behind the conspiracy began to move. Shadows lurked in the night, watching the restaurant and following Mark's steps. One afternoon, as Mark was leaving the restaurant, he noticed a black car following him. With his heart racing, he managed to lose it among the city's alleys. He then understood that the danger was real and that he had to act quickly. That night, Mark made a risky decision. He contacted an investigative journalist known for his integrity and gave him copies of all the information he had gathered. "If anything happens to me," Mark told the journalist, "make sure this comes to light." The journalist, impressed by the magnitude of the information, nodded solemnly. "You have my word." Meanwhile, in the now almost empty Montgomery mansion, Mrs. Montgomery received a disturbing visit. One of the men implicated in the corruption network threatened her veiledly. "It would be a shame if your daughter suffered an accident in prison, wouldn't it, Mrs. Montgomery?" the man said with a cold smile. Mrs. Montgomery, feeling for the first time the true weight of her actions, realized that she had unleashed forces that were now out of her control. With trembling hands, she dialed Mr. Montgomery's number. "Albert," she said with a broken voice, "we have to do something. Valerie is in danger." Mr. Montgomery, who had been cooperating with the authorities, felt the world crashing down on him. "I'll make some calls. We have to get her out of there." The storm that was brewing was bigger than any of them had imagined. Mark, without knowing it, had become the center of a hurricane that threatened to sweep away everything in its path. That night, as the city slept, several forces were set in motion. The journalist began to write the story that would shake the foundations of power. The authorities, alerted by Mr. Montgomery, prepared an operation to protect Valerie in prison, and in the shadows, the conspirators plotted their plans to silence those who threatened to expose the truth. The morning arrived with a palpable tension in the air. Mark, who had barely slept, prepared to face the most crucial day of his life. He knew that once he handed over the evidence to the authorities, there would be no turning back. At the restaurant, Mrs. Carroll and Lisa helped Mark organize the final details. "Son," said Mrs. Carroll, taking Mark's hands, "whatever happens today, I want you to know that I'm proud of you." Lisa, with eyes bright with unshed tears, added, "We all are, Mark. You're a brave man." Moved by the support, Mark hugged them both. "Thank you, I wouldn't have made it this far without you." Meanwhile, in prison, Valerie was being transferred to a maximum security cell. The guards, alerted about a possible threat, were on high alert. "What's going on?" Valerie asked, confused by the sudden change. "It's for your safety, Miss Montgomery," one of the guards replied. "Orders from above." In the Montgomery mansion, Mrs. Montgomery and Mr. Montgomery prepared to leave. They had decided to voluntarily turn themselves in to the authorities to confess everything they knew, hoping to protect their daughter, Evelyn, said Mr. Montgomery as they got into the car. Whatever happens today, I want you to know that I love you. Mrs. Montgomery, with tears in her eyes, replied, And I love you, Albert. I'm sorry for leading us down this path. In the city centre, the journalist to whom Mark had entrusted the information was preparing to publish his article. He knew that once the story came to light, nothing would ever be the same. Mark, accompanied by his lawyer, was heading to the prosecutor's office to present the evidence. On the way, he noticed several cars that seemed to be following them. I think we have company, Mark said to his lawyer, who nodded gravely. I was prepared for this, the lawyer replied. Taking out his phone, I'll alert our contacts in the police. Suddenly, one of the cars following them accelerated. Ramming Mark's vehicle from behind. The impact caused the car to skid, but the lawyer managed to maintain control. Hold on, the lawyer shouted, flooring the accelerator. A frantic chase through the city streets began. Mark, clutching the briefcase with the evidence, prayed to reach the prosecutor's office safely. Meanwhile, in the prison, Valerie heard commotion outside her cell. Shouts and sounds of struggle came from the hallway. Stay back, one of the guards yelled, drawing his weapon. At that moment, news broke across all media. The journalist's article had been published, revealing the extensive corruption network and the names of all those involved. The entire city was shocked by the revelations. At the prosecutor's office, a special team was preparing to receive Mark, and the evidence, the Attorney General, aware of the magnitude of the case, had taken personal control of the situation. Mark's car, dented and smoking, skidded to a stop in front of the prosecutor's office. Mark and his lawyer jumped out, running towards the entrance as their pursuers approached. Stop them, shouted one of the men chasing them. But it was too late. Mark and his lawyer entered the building, where they were met by a security team that immediately escorted them to a secure room. Mr. Rodriguez, said the Attorney General, shaking Mark's hand, you've made a very brave decision. Now show us what you have. As Mark presented the evidence, simultaneous events unfolded throughout the city. Mrs. and Mr. Montgomery arrived at the police station to turn themselves in. In the prison, the attempted attack on Valerie was thwarted by the guards. And in the streets, police began making arrests based on the information published by the journalist. The day of reckoning had arrived, and with it, the truth finally came to light. But for Mark, Valerie, and everyone involved, the consequences of this day were just beginning to unfold. The fate of many hung by a thread, and the question that remained in the air was, would the truth be enough to repair all the damage done? The days following Judgment Day, as the media called it, were a whirlwind of events. The entire city seemed to be in a state of shock as arrests and investigations unfolded. Mark, now under police protection, became the center of media attention. His story, from garbage collector to hero who unmasked a corruption network, captivated public opinion. At a press conference, the Attorney General announced, "Thanks to Mr. Rodriguez's bravery and the evidence he provided, we have been able to dismantle one of the largest corruption networks in our city's history." Meanwhile, Valerie was released from prison, absolved of all charges. As she left, she found a completely changed world. Camera flashes momentarily blinded her as reporters shouted questions. "Miss Montgomery, how do you feel about being released? Did you know about the extent of corruption in your family's company? Have you spoken with Mark Rodriguez since your release?" Overwhelmed, Valerie could only mutter a no comment as she was escorted to a waiting car. At the police station, Mrs. and Mr. Montgomery faced the consequences of their actions. Although their cooperation had been crucial in closing the case, they still faced serious charges. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn," said Mr. Montgomery, taking his wife's hand through the bars separating their cells. "I never imagined we'd end up like this." Mrs. Montgomery, with tears in her eyes, replied, "I'm the one who should apologize, Albert. My ambition and pride led us to this. I just hope Valerie can forgive us someday." As the city processed the revelations, Mark faced his own dilemmas. The restaurant's success had grown exponentially thanks to his recent fame, but he felt uncomfortable with all the attention. One afternoon, as he was closing the restaurant, Lisa approached him. "Mark," she said softly, "have you thought about what you're going to do now?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, Lisa, I don't know. Everything has changed so fast. Have you talked to Valerie?" Lisa asked, trying to hide the pain in her voice. "No," Mark replied. "I don't know if I should. After everything that's happened." At that moment, the restaurant door opened. Mark and Lisa turned, surprised to see someone enter after closing time. There in the doorway stood Valerie. Silence filled the place as Mark and Valerie looked at each other, years of history and unspoken emotions floating between them. "Mark," Valerie finally said, her voice barely a whisper, I needed to see you to thank you for everything you've done." Lisa, feeling the tension in the air, decided to discreetly withdraw. "I'll leave you to talk," she said, quickly exiting the restaurant. Finally alone, Mark and Valerie faced the conversation they had been avoiding. "Valerie, Mark began, but she interrupted him. "No, please let me speak first," Valerie said, moving closer. "Mark, what you did for me, for my family, for the entire city, I have no words to thank. You risked everything." Mark looked at her, feeling his heart racing. "I'd do it again without hesitation, Valerie, but there's something I need to know." "What?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why did you turn yourself in? Why did you take the blame for your parents?" Mark asked, the question that had been tormenting him for weeks. Valerie lowered her gaze, tears forming in her eyes. "Because I understood too late the true meaning of love and sacrifice. Something you taught me a long time ago, Mark." Their eyes met, and at that moment, they both felt something change between them. The past, present, and future seemed to converge in that instant. But before they could say anything more, Mark's phone rang. It was Mrs. Carroll, her voice urgent on the other end of the line. "Mark, son, you need to come quickly. Something's happened, something big." The call ended abruptly, leaving Mark and Valerie confused and worried. They knew that, despite everything they had faced, fate still had more surprises in store for them. What they couldn't imagine was that the revelation that was about to come would change not only their lives, but the history of the entire city. The past, long buried, was about to resurface, bringing with it secrets that no one expected to discover. Mark and Valerie rushed to Mrs. Carroll's house, their hearts pounding with uncertainty. As they entered, they found the old woman sitting in her favorite armchair, holding an old photo album and with an expression of astonishment on her face. "Mrs. Carroll, what's going on?" Mark asked, kneeling beside her. The old woman looked up, her eyes bright with emotion and tears. "Mark, Valerie, sit down. There's something you need to know, something I've kept secret for a long time." Intrigued, Mark and Valerie sat down across from Mrs. Carroll, who opened the album with trembling hands. "Many years ago," Mrs. Carroll began, "before either of you were born, this city was very different. There was great inequality and corruption, much worse than what you just uncovered." She turned the pages of the album, showing black and white photos of a city they barely recognized. "My husband, Lisa's grandfather, was a humble man, but with big dreams. He worked as a garbage collector," she said, looking meaningfully at Mark, and Valerie exchanged a surprised look. "One day," Mrs. Carroll continued, "my husband discovered something while working documents that proved the corruption of the city's leaders, but unlike you, Mark, he didn't have the courage to confront them directly." Mrs. Carroll pulled a yellowed envelope from the album. "Instead, he created a long-term plan. He used the information to negotiate in secret, obtaining small concessions for workers, improvements in poor neighborhoods. Little by little, he changed the city from the shadows." Mark and Valerie listened in astonishment as Mrs. Carroll revealed how her husband had laid the foundations for many of the social institutions and programs that now shape the city. "But there's more," said Mrs. Carroll, taking out one last photo from the album. In it, a young man dressed in a garbage collector's uniform stood next to an elegant couple. "This is my husband, and these are Valerie's grandparents." Valerie gasped, recognizing her grandparents in the photo. "But how? Your grandfather, Valerie, was one of the few." Powerful men who decided to do the right thing. He worked in secret with my husband to implement real changes. Unfortunately, he died before he could complete his mission. Mrs. Carroll looked at Mark and Valerie with a sad smile. Do you see now why your lives are so intertwined? It's not a coincidence. It's destiny completing what began so many years ago. The revelation fell on Mark and Valerie like an avalanche. Suddenly, everything took on a new meaning. Their meeting, their struggles, even Mrs. Montgomery's opposition to their romance. But why are you telling us this now? Mark asked, trying to process all the information. Mrs. Carroll sighed deeply. Because the work isn't finished. The corruption you exposed is just the tip of the iceberg. There are darker and older forces at play, and you two together are the key to finishing what our ancestors started. At that moment, as if fate wanted to underscore Mrs. Carroll's words, Mark's phone rang. It was the journalist who had published the original story. Mark, the journalist said urgently, I just received information from an anonymous source. There's more, much more. The corruption network extends beyond our city, involving international figures. And there's something else. Something about a project called Phoenix that seems to be at the center of it all. Mark looked at Valerie and Mrs. Carroll, feeling the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders once again. I understand we'll meet tomorrow to discuss the details. As he hung up, Mark shared the information with Valerie and Mrs. Carroll. The old woman nodded gravely. The Phoenix Project, Mrs. Carroll murmured. My husband mentioned it once just before he died. He said it was the key to understanding everything, but I never knew what it meant. Valerie, who had been silent, processing all the information, finally spoke. I think I've heard that name before. In my father's files, there was a folder with that name, but it was always empty. Mark stood up, his determination renewed. Then it's clear what we have to do. We have to find out what the Phoenix Project is and how it connects to all of this. Valerie stood up too, taking Mark's hand. We'll do it together. This time, I won't let anything separate us. Mrs. Carroll looked at them with pride and a touch of concern. My children, what you're about to face is dangerous. But I trust that together, you can finish what began so many years ago. As they left Mrs. Carroll's house, Mark and Valerie paused for a moment. On the porch. Night had fallen over the city, and the lights shone in the distance as a reminder of everything that was at stake. Valerie, Mark said softly, before we dive into this, I need to know, are you sure? Once we start, there's no turning back. Valerie looked at Mark, her eyes full of determination and love. Mark, I've made many mistakes in my life, but loving you was never one of them. I'm ready to face whatever comes as long as we're together. They kissed under the moonlight, sealing their commitment not only to each other, but to the truth and justice they were about to pursue. What they didn't know was that at that very moment, powerful forces were already moving against them. In the shadows, dark figures conspired to keep the secrets of the Phoenix Project hidden at any cost. The stage was set for the final battle, one that would decide not only the fate of Mark and Valerie, but the future of the entire city, and perhaps beyond. The legacy of their ancestors, long forgotten, was about to be reborn. From the ashes, like the mythical phoenix, bringing with it the promise of change and the threat of unprecedented danger. The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Mark and Valerie. Working tirelessly with the journalist and a small team of trusted individuals, they began to unravel the mysteries of the Phoenix Project. They discovered that the project was a secret initiative started decades ago, originally designed to revitalize the city's economy and eradicate corruption. However, over time it had been co-opted by dark interests, becoming a tool to consolidate power and wealth in the hands of a few. As they delved deeper into their investigation, Mark and Valerie found themselves facing increasing dangers. Bribery attempts, veiled threats, and even a failed attempt on their lives only served to strengthen their determination. One night, while working late at the restaurant-turned-headquarters, Lisa rushed in. Mark, Valerie, she said breathlessly, you have to see this. She showed them a video on her phone. It was Mrs. Montgomery, unrecognizable without her usual arrogance, making a public confession. "I have made terrible mistakes," Mrs. Montgomery said in the video, tears running down her cheeks. "But now I understand the harm I've caused. I'm willing to reveal everything I know about the Phoenix Project and those involved, regardless of the consequences for me." Mark and Valerie looked at each other, surprised by this unexpected turn. "Mom," Valerie whispered, moved by her mother's transformation. But their moment of astonishment was interrupted by an urgent call from Mr. Montgomery. "Valerie, Mark," he said with a trembling voice, "I just received a threat. They know about your mother's confession. They're coming after her. You have to protect her." Without losing a second, Mark and Valerie sprang into action. With the help of their contacts in the police, they organized an operation to protect Mrs. Montgomery and secure her testimony. The night turned into a deadly chess game through the city streets. Mark and Valerie, guiding the operation from a distance, faced each move of their adversaries with cunning and courage. Finally, in a tension-filled climax, they managed to get Mrs. Montgomery to safety and capture the leaders of the conspiracy behind the Phoenix Project. With dawn, the truth finally came to light. In a historic press conference, Mark and Valerie, flanked by Mrs. Montgomery, Mr. Montgomery, and the authorities, revealed the whole truth about the Phoenix Project and the corruption network that had plagued the city for decades. "Today," Mark said before the cameras, "we not only expose the truth, but we also honor the legacy of those who fought silently before us. This is the true rebirth of the Phoenix, a city rising from its ashes, stronger and more just." Valerie took the microphone. "And we promise that this is just the beginning. We will work tirelessly to ensure that the dream of our ancestors, a city free of corruption and full of opportunities for all, becomes a reality." As the city celebrated the beginning of a new era, Mark and Valerie found a moment of tranquility on the terrace of the restaurant where it all began. "Who would have thought that a garbage collector and a millionaire's daughter would end up saving the city?" Mark joked, hugging Valerie. She smiled, resting her head on Mark's shoulder. "Fate has curious ways of working, but I wouldn't have wanted it any other way." At that moment, surrounded by the love of their friends and family, with the promise of a bright future ahead of them, Mark and Valerie understood that their story, which began with contempt and prejudice, had transformed into a symbol of hope and change for the entire city. And so, as the sun set over the reborn city, Mark and Valerie sealed their love with a kiss, knowing that together they could face any challenge the future held for them. Their story, once a simple soap opera of forbidden love, had become an epic of redemption, justice, and the transformative power of true love. As they looked out over the city, now bathed in the golden light of sunset, Mark and Valerie knew that their journey was far from over. The Phoenix Project, though exposed, had deep roots that would take time to fully eradicate, but they were ready for the challenge. "What do we do now?" Valerie asked, her voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Mark squeezed her hand. "We keep going. We build on what we've started. There's still so much work to do." In the days that followed, Mark and Valerie became the faces of a new movement for transparency and social justice in the city. They used the restaurant as a base of operations, working with community leaders, reformist politicians, and honest law enforcement officials to implement lasting changes. Mrs. Carroll, proud of what they had accomplished, decided to share more of her late husband's notes and contacts, providing invaluable insights into the city's history of corruption and resistance. Lisa, having come to terms with Mark and Valerie's relationship, threw herself into the cause, using her skills to organize grassroots, support and manage the growing volunteer network. Even Mrs. Montgomery, seeking redemption, offered her business expertise to help create job opportunities in underprivileged areas of the city. As months passed, the city began to transform. New anti-corruption laws were passed, social programs were implemented, and a sense of hope permeated the streets that had once been ruled by fear and greed. But not everyone was happy with the changes. The remnants of the old corrupt system, though weakened, still lurked in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. One evening, as Mark and Valerie were leaving a community meeting, a car sped past them, its occupants firing shots. They ducked just in time, the bullets shattering the windows of a nearby building. As they caught their breath, huddled behind a parked car, Valerie looked at Mark, her eyes wide with the realization of the ongoing danger. "They're not going to stop, are they?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. Mark's face was grim but determined. "No, they're not, but neither are we." This incident only strengthened their resolve. They knew that true change wouldn't come easily or quickly, but they were committed to seeing it through, no matter the cost. As word of the attack spread, the city rallied around them. Thousands gathered in a spontaneous demonstration of support, their candles lighting up the night sky in a powerful symbol of unity and hope. Standing before the crowd, their hands clasped tightly, Mark and Valerie realized that their love story had become something much bigger than themselves. It had become a beacon of hope for an entire city, a living proof that change was possible, that love could triumph over greed and fear. "We're all in this together," Mark said to the assembled crowd, his voice strong and clear. "This is our city, our future. And together, we will build a legacy that our children and grandchildren can be proud of." Valerie nodded, adding, "The road ahead won't be easy, but as long as we stand united, as long as we hold on to hope and love, there's nothing we can't overcome." As the crowd cheered, Mark and Valerie shared a look of deep understanding. They knew that their journey was far from over, that there would be more challenges, more dangers ahead, but they also knew that they had each other, and the support of a city that was finally awakening to its own potential. Their love, born in the most unlikely of circumstances, had become a catalyst for change, a force for good that would continue to shape the destiny of their city for generations to come. And so, as they stood there, surrounded by the warmth and light of thousands of candles, Mark and Valerie embraced, ready to face whatever the future might hold, together.